When a tiny bobcat kitten named Toby was rescued from the side of the road, the family who took him in had no idea how he would fit in, especially since their house was already ruled by three mischievous Maine Coon Kittens: Daisy, Marshmallow, and Oliver. They are the fluffy sovereigns of the household, with their own set of rules and a clear sense of order. What happens when a wild cat, born in the wild but not raised in the woods, is brought into a world of civilized cats and raised by three Maine Coon? This is the story of two different species, but one of the strangest and most heartwarming sibling bonds ever. Arthur Henderson considered the winding stretch of asphalt that cut through the dense Maine woods his personal decompression chamber. At 72, with hands gnarled from a lifetime of woodworking and a heart softened by 48 years of marriage to his beloved Martha, these solo fishing trips were his cherished ritual. It was less about the fish and more about the silence, the scent of pine, and the gentle lapping of the lake against his small boat. But on this particular Tuesday in late October, the silence was broken. As his old Ford F-150 rumbled around a sharp bend, its headlights sliced through the deepening twilight and caught a flicker of movement on the gravel shoulder. Arthur slowed, his curiosity piqued. He expected a raccoon or a possum, but what he saw was a pathetic, shivering ball of fluff, no bigger than his clenched fist. It let out a desperate, high-pitched cry that pierced the evening chill and went straight to his heart. He pulled over, the truck's engine ticking in the quiet. Cautiously, he approached. The creature was a kitten, but a strange-looking one. Its fur was a mottled brown. Its ears had peculiar little tufts of black fur at the tips, and its paws seemed disproportionately large for its tiny body. There was no sign of a mother or siblings, only the grim, dark stain on the pavement a few yards away that told a tragic story. This little one was an orphan. "Well now, what have we here?" Arthur murmured, his voice a low, gentle rumble. The kitten flinched, attempting a hiss that came out as a squeak. Its oversized blue eyes were wide with terror. Arthur's heart, a notoriously soft target, surrendered completely. He unbuttoned his thick flannel jacket, shrugged it off, and gently scooped the trembling creature into its warm folds. The kitten, exhausted and cold, offered no resistance, burrowing into the soft fabric. Back home, Martha was just taking a pan of her famous cinnamon rolls out of the oven. The warm, sweet smell filled their cozy two-story house. She looked up as Arthur came in, her brow furrowed with concern. "Arthur, you're late. I was starting to worry." "Had to make a stop, Marty," he said, a sheepish grin on his face. He carefully folded back the lapel of his jacket. Martha peered in, her eyes widening. "Oh my heavens, Arthur, where did you find that?" "Side of the road, all alone." She reached in a finger, stroking the kitten's downy head. It responded with a weak, rattling purr. The poor dear. He's all skin and bones. And what strange ears. The next morning, they took the kitten to the town's only veterinarian doctor, Simmons, a man whose own age was a topic of local debate but whose hands were as steady as ever. He placed the kitten on the cold metal table, adjusted his spectacles, and let out a low whistle. "Well, Arthur, Martha," he said, looking over his glasses. "You two don't do things by halves. This isn't just any stray." He gently opened the kitten's mouth and examined its paws. "What you have here is Lynx rufus, a bobcat." The Hendersons stared. A bobcat? In their living room? "He can't be more than 5 or 6 weeks old," Doc Simmons continued. "Now the proper thing to do is call the state wildlife rehabilitator. They're equipped for this. He sighed, already knowing what the response would be. But I can tell you right now, they're 3 hours away and full to the gills with raccoons and a bear cub that got into some fermented apples. They'll likely have to… Well, he didn't finish the sentence. The thought hung in the sterile air of the exam room. Martha looked at the tiny creature, now tentatively licking a drop of water from her finger. She thought of the cold roadside and the dark stain. "We'll take care of him," she said with a firmness that left no room for argument. "Just for a bit, until he's strong." Arthur nodded in agreement. "He needs a name." Martha smiled. "He looks like a little Toby." Doc Simmons sighed again, a mix of resignation and admiration. "All right, but be prepared. You're not raising a house cat. His instincts will be a whole different kettle of fish, and you've got the triumvirate at home to consider." The triumvirate was their trio of Maine Coon Kittens, the undisputed fluffy sovereigns of the Henderson household. They were 6 months old and just beginning to grow into their magnificent coats and personalities. There was Daisy, a calico with a plume of a tail and an air of regal authority. She was the matriarch in training, the observer, the one who passed judgment from her perch on the back of the floral sofa. Then came Marshmallow, a pristine white giant in the making, whose life's purpose seemed to be maintaining the flawlessness of his fur. He was the family's resident drama queen, prone to sighing theatrically if his nap was disturbed. And finally, there was Oliver, a ginger tabby with 4 perfect white paws and a heart full of reckless abandon. Oliver was the adventurer, the one who saw every dangling cord as a challenge and every rustle of paper as an invitation to pounce. The introduction did not go smoothly. Martha placed Toby, now fortified with a belly full of kitten formula, on the living room rug. The 3 Maine Coons, who had been snoozing in a sunbeam, awoke at once. 3 heads popped up, ears swiveling like radar dishes. Daisy was the first to approach. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her tail held low and twitching. She sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar wild scent of the newcomer. Marshmallow, from a safe distance, puffed his entire body up to twice its normal size, looking like a startled cloud. Oliver, ever the brave one, crept forward, let out a valiant hiss, and then immediately leaped backward 3 feet, when Toby let out a terrified chirp in response. Toby, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fluff and feline disapproval, scrambled under the nearest armchair and refused to come out. The first few weeks were a masterclass in chaos. Feeding time was a spectacle. Daisy, Marshmallow, and Oliver would line up, nibbling delicately from their respective ceramic bowls. Toby, on the other hand, treated every meal as a life-or-death struggle. He would launch himself at his dish, planting both front paws firmly in the milk-soaked kibble and plunging his face in up to his tufted ears. He emerged sputtering, covered in food, having scattered half his meal across Martha's freshly mopped linoleum floor. "Arthur, get the cloth!" became Martha's daily refrain. Playtime was even more bewildering for the little Bobcat. The Maine Coons adored their feather wand and the elusive red dot of the laser pointer. They would chase, leap, and bat with a refined athletic grace. Toby had no concept of toys. His prey was far more elemental. He pounced on shifting sunbeams, stalked dust bunnies with lethal intensity, and ambushed his own tail, spinning in frantic circles until he grew dizzy and cannonballed into a wall with a soft thump. The other kittens would simply stop and stare, their heads cocked in unison, as if watching a bizarre foreign film without subtitles. Toby was determined to fit in. He was a creature of instinct, but his strongest instinct now was to belong to this strange, soft, warm pack. He became a diligent, if often misguided, student of kittenhood. Daisy, having accepted her role as den mother, decided it was her duty to civilize the savage. Her first lesson was the sacred art of ambushing human feet from beneath the couch. She demonstrated flawlessly, her body low to the ground, her hindquarters wiggling in anticipation. As Arthur shuffled past in his worn leather slippers, she shot out a single paw, hooked his ankle with gentle claws, and then darted away. It was a perfect textbook ambush. Toby watched from under the coffee table, his blue eyes wide with concentration. He processed the information. Hide, wiggle, attack the noisy moving thing. A few minutes later, Martha started up the vacuum cleaner. It roared to life, a monstrous, shuffling beast. Toby saw his chance. He crouched, he wiggled with an intensity that shook his whole body, and then he launched himself. He didn't just bat at it. He executed a full-body tackle, wrapping all four paws around the vacuum's hose. The result was instantaneous pandemonium. Toby clung on for dear life as the hose bucked and writhed. Martha let out a shriek of surprise, and the three Maine Coons bolted for the safety of the upstairs landing, their tails looking like bottle brushes. Arthur, laughing so hard he had to sit down, finally rescued the terrified Bobcat from the belly of the beast. Next, it was Marshmallow's turn to impart some culture. Marshmallow was appalled by Toby's utilitarian approach to his tail. A tail, in Marshmallow's view, was not for frantic chasing. It was an instrument of elegance, a feathery boa for conveying subtle emotions. He decided to give Toby a lesson. He sat primly on the hearth rug, swished his magnificent tail in a slow, hypnotic arc, and then curled it gracefully around his front paws. He looked at Toby expectantly. Toby, ever the eager pupil, tried to replicate the maneuver. But his tail was a short, stubby exclamation point, not a flowing sentence. He swished it so hard he lost his balance, got his oversized back feet tangled with his front ones, and rolled head over heels across the polished wooden floor, finally coming to a stop when he collided with a small table holding Martha's prize-winning African violets. The pot wobbled, tipped, and crashed to the floor in a cloud of soil and purple petals. Martha simply closed her eyes and counted to 10. Oliver, the daredevil, focused his tutelage on the art of climbing. For Oliver, gravity was merely a suggestion. The floor-to-ceiling curtains in the dining room were his personal Everest. He demonstrated for Toby, scaling the floral fabric with nimble, silent paws, reaching the top of the valance to survey his kingdom before sliding back down like a tiny firefighter. Toby was mesmerized. He backed up, took a running start, and leaped. But where Oliver was a scalpel, Toby was a sledgehammer. He hit the curtains with the full force of his muscular little body. There was a sound of tearing fabric and the sickening splinter of wood as the entire curtain rod was ripped from the wall. Toby landed in a heap, triumphantly tangled in yards of shredded chintz, which he then proceeded to drag around the house like a royal robe. Arthur found him parading in the kitchen, the curtain rod clattering behind him. He didn't scold. He just shook his head and chuckled. "Martha," he called out, "I think it's time we invested in a cat tree. A very, very sturdy one." The litter box was a whole separate saga. For the Maine Coons, it was a simple, private affair. For Toby, it was a sandbox. He would dig with wild abandon, sending showers of clay litter halfway across the laundry room. He'd pounce on the clumps, bat them around the floor, and occasionally fall asleep in the clean box, treating it as a personal, sandy hammock. Martha solved that problem by buying a large covered litter box that looked more like a piece of space-age pet furniture, which at least contained the worst of the fallout. Slowly, painstakingly, a shift began to occur. The chaos was still there, but it was now threaded with moments of profound connection. The turning point was nap time. One cold afternoon, Martha came in from the garden and found the four of them curled together in Arthur's big armchair. It wasn't a random pile of fur. Daisy, Marshmallow, and Oliver had formed a distinct circle, and nestled securely in the very center, snoring softly, was Toby. They had cocooned him in their collective warmth and purrs, a clear, unspoken declaration. "You're one of us now." Martha tiptoed out of the room, her heart swelling. Toby's wild instincts began to be tempered by his siblings' domesticity. He learned that play fighting with Oliver required sheathed claws. His pounces on toys, which Arthur had bought in bulk, became softer. He even started to purr, a sound quite different from the kitten's gentle thrumming. Toby's purr was a deep, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards, a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment. He even attempted to replicate the Maine Coon's affectionate headbutt, which, due to his enthusiastic nature, was more of a gentle but firm head bonk that always made Arthur laugh. One evening, a stray German shepherd wandered into the yard, barking aggressively at the squirrels. Inside, the three Maine Coons lined up at the window, their backs arched and their fur on end, hissing a unified chorus of feline fury. Toby walked calmly to the window, placed his large paws on the sill, and looked out. He didn't hiss. He let out a low, guttural growl that started deep in his chest, a sound that carried the ancient menace of the forest. The dog in the yard stopped barking, whined, tucked its tail between its legs, and trotted away. Daisy, Marshmallow, and Oliver all looked at their strange brother with a newfound, profound respect. He wasn't just their goofy sibling. He was their protector. Months melted into a year. The kittens were no longer kittens, but majestic young cats. And Toby was no longer a tiny orphan. He was a sleek, powerful adolescent bobcat, tipping the scales at nearly 20 pounds. He was noticeably larger than the Maine Coons, his tufted ears, short tail, and piercing gaze a constant reminder of his wild heritage. But his behavior was anything but wild. He was a Henderson. Doc Simmons came for the annual house call, a service he provided for his oldest clients. He walked into the living room and stopped dead in his tracks. The scene before him was one of domestic bliss, albeit a surreal one. Daisy was meticulously grooming Toby's head, her tiny tongue working diligently on the fur behind his tufted ears. Marshmallow was batting lazily at Toby's stubby tail as it twitched in his sleep. And Toby himself was stretched out on his back, all four paws in the air, without a care in the world. "My word," the vet breathed, setting down his bag. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." As he examined each animal, he marveled at Toby's condition. He was healthy, strong, and remarkably docile. "You know, Arthur," Doc Simmons said, listening to Toby's heart, the bobcat rumbling his deep purr throughout the examination. "I was a fool to doubt you and Martha, but seeing him now, it brings up a difficult truth." Arthur and Martha looked at him, a sudden knot of anxiety tightening in their chests. "He's imprinted on you completely," the vet explained gently. "And on these cats. He thinks he's one of them. He never learned to hunt from his mother, never learned the real laws of the wild. To release him now, it would be a death sentence. He wouldn't survive a week." The weight of their decision, made in a moment of compassion a year ago, settled heavily upon them. They had saved his life, but in doing so, they had irrevocably altered his destiny. He was trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the beautiful, half-wild animal who was now utterly dependent on them. She reached out and stroked his head, and he leaned into her touch, bunting his head against her hand. That night, a fierce nor'easter blew outside, rattling the windows and blanketing the world in white. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow across the room. Arthur sat in his armchair, a book open in his lap. Martha was in her rocker, her knitting needles clicking a soft, rhythmic tune. The three Maine Coons were artfully draped across the furniture like living, breathing throws. Toby was stretched out on the braided rug before the fire, a bastion of calm. For a long while, he simply watched the flames. Then Oliver, feeling mischievous, hopped down and began to bat at the tassel of Martha's knitting bag. He snagged it with a claw, pulling the yarn. Toby's eyes swiveled. He rose with a fluid grace that belied his size and padded silently over. He didn't growl or swat. He simply nudged Oliver firmly but gently with his head, dislodging the claw. It was a clear, brotherly admonishment. Leave it. Don't bother Mom. He then walked to Martha's rocker, lay down with a soft sigh, and rested his large, tufted head on her slippered foot. He looked up at her, his wild, intelligent eyes meeting hers. And then he gave her a long, slow, deliberate blink. The ultimate expression of trust and love he had learned from his adopted family. Martha's knitting lay forgotten in her lap. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time, it was not a tear of sorrow or worry. It was a tear of overwhelming, improbable joy. Arthur looked over his book, his own eyes misty. They had not just rescued a bobcat kitten. They had woven a new, extraordinary thread into the tapestry of their lives. Toby wasn't a wild animal living in a house, nor was he truly a house cat. He was something more. He was Toby Henderson, a cherished brother, a devoted son, a permanent and beloved resident of a home filled to the brim with a love as wild and wonderful as he was.